rock the jukebox. I wanna hear some Jones. My heart ain't.
In a moment that would echo across the hearts of millions, an 18-year-old from Addis, Louisiana, stepped onto the American Idol stage, not with an entourage, not with a polished act or rehearsed charm, but with a cowboy hat, 3 red coolers full of homemade Cajun food, and something far more powerful, a story hidden behind his eyes. His name is John Foster, and to most of America watching at home, he was just another small-town hopeful chasing a dream. But beneath the calm voice and southern manners was a young man carrying a burden few could imagine. Before the judges could even ask his name, John's quiet presence hinted at something deeper. When he sang, there was no theatrical bravado. Instead, what emerged was a voice steeped in experience, loss, and resilience. A voice that didn't just perform, it confessed. What many didn't know, as he strummed the first notes of Alan Jackson's Don't Rock the Jukebox, was that this wasn't just a competition for him. This was a tribute, a spiritual offering, a chance to give voice to someone who no longer could. Because behind every lyric was the memory of a girl named Maggie, and behind every breath was a grief still fresh. As the nation leaned in to hear this unknown contestant sing, few realized they were witnessing not just a performance, but the beginning of a story that would unfold with shocking depth, stirring honesty, and a heartbreak so profound that even seasoned judges would be left speechless. And as we'll uncover, John Foster's journey wasn't just about winning a title. It was about honoring a promise, carrying a legacy, and using his gift to heal what words alone never could. Long before national headlines and standing ovations, John Foster lived a life defined not by fame, but by quiet values passed down through generations. Born and raised in the small town of Addis, Louisiana, John was no stranger to community or hard work. His family owned a local butcher shop, a fixture. In a moment that would echo across the hearts of millions, an 18-year-old from Addis, Louisiana, stepped onto the American Idol stage, not with an entourage, not with a polished act or rehearsed charm, but with a cowboy hat, 3 red coolers full of homemade Cajun food, and something far more powerful, a story hidden behind his eyes. His name is John Foster, and to most of America watching at home, he was just another small-town hopeful chasing a dream. But beneath the calm voice and southern manners was a young man carrying a burden few could imagine. Before the judges could even ask his name, John's quiet presence hinted at something deeper. When he sang, there was no theatrical bravado. Instead, what emerged was a voice steeped in experience, loss, and resilience. A voice that didn't just perform, it confessed. What many didn't know, as he strummed the first notes of Alan Jackson's Don't Rock the Jukebox, was that this wasn't just a competition for him. This was a tribute, a spiritual offering, a chance to give voice to someone who no longer could. Because behind every lyric was the memory of a girl named Maggie, and behind every breath was a grief still fresh. As the nation leaned in to hear this unknown contestant sing, few realized they were witnessing not just a performance, but the beginning of a story that would unfold with shocking depth, stirring honesty, and a heartbreak so profound that even seasoned judges would be left speechless. And as we'll uncover, John Foster's journey wasn't just about winning a title. It was about honoring a promise, carrying a legacy, and using his gift to heal what words alone never could. Long before national headlines and standing ovations, John Foster lived a life defined not by fame, but by quiet values passed down through generations. Born and raised in the small town of Addis, Louisiana, John was no stranger to community or hard work. His family owned a local butcher shop, a fixture in the town and a symbol of tradition. There, amid the scent of smoked meats and the rhythm of early mornings, he learned the importance of discipline, loyalty, and service. But even as his hands worked the family trade, his heart was quietly stirred by melodies that drifted through the radio and the spirit of the South's country legacy. Still, music was never his main pursuit. In school, John wasn't the typical performer. He was a self-described science nerd, more comfortable solving equations than taking the stage. His teachers and peers saw him as the kind of student destined for medicine, not music. At 15, without formal lessons or flashy ambition, he picked up a guitar. The decision wasn't sparked by dreams of stardom, it was sparked by solitude. Alone in his room, he taught himself to play, chord by chord, finding in music a kind of peace that textbooks couldn't offer. Influenced by legends like George Strait, Merle Haggard, and Conway Twitty, John gravitated toward the classics. Songs rooted in pain, pride, and perseverance. It was never about attention. In fact, he rarely played in public. His early performances were at community events, where he stood quietly under the spotlight, unsure if his voice belonged there. But something kept drawing him back. Music, once a whisper in his life, began to grow louder. Still, as he graduated valedictorian from Brusley High School in 2024 and enrolled in LSU's biology program, John continued to see music as a side note, not the main score. It wasn't until life took an unimaginable turn that this quiet, unassuming boy would be thrust into the national spotlight, carrying with him not only his guitar, but a heart forever marked by loss, and a message America wasn't ready for but needed to hear. It was supposed to be a night of celebration. New Year's Eve, 2022 families across Addis, Louisiana were preparing to ring in the new year. But for John Foster and his community, that night would become a permanent scar etched into memory. An intersection that thousands had crossed before without a second thought, tragedy struck with violent finality. A police officer engaged in a high-speed chase ran a red light and crashed into a vehicle carrying 3 teenagers. The impact was instant, merciless. 2 of the young girls inside, Maggie Dunn and Caroline Gill, were killed. Maggie's younger brother, Liam, survived but with severe injuries. The officer responsible would later resign and plead guilty, receiving a 42-year prison sentence. But no amount of justice could fill the void that was left behind. For many, it was a senseless loss. For John Foster, it was personal. Maggie wasn't just a classmate or a face in the hallway. She was family in every way but blood. They had grown up together, shared classrooms, laughs, awkward teenage milestones. Their bond was one of those quiet, enduring friendships that feels stitched into the fabric of a small-town upbringing. And Maggie believed in John. Long before the American Idol stage, long before the nation knew his name, she saw something in him that even he struggled to see. In one of her final acts of kindness, she wrote John a letter, encouraging him to pursue music, reminding him that his voice could move people. Those words became more than encouragement. They became a mission. When John later stepped onto the Idol stage and sang his original song, Tell That Angel I Love Her, he wasn't just performing. He was grieving out loud. Every lyric was a love letter to Maggie. Every note a cry from the depths of sorrow. His hands trembled, his voice cracked, and for the first time, the audience saw not just a contestant, but a young man offering the most vulnerable parts of himself for the world to witness. That moment, born from unthinkable loss, would change the course of his life and the hearts of those who heard it. When John Foster arrived at the American Idol auditions, he didn't look like a star in the making. He wasn't dressed in flashy clothes or rehearsing vocal runs backstage. Instead, he carried in 3 red coolers filled with homemade Cajun food, a humble gesture from a boy raised in the heart of Louisiana. Clad in a cowboy hat that felt more like part of his soul than a costume, John approached the audition room with the quiet confidence of someone who wasn't there to impress, but simply to share. He opened with Alan Jackson's Don't Rock the Jukebox, and at first, the judges smiled politely. They'd seen hundreds of hopefuls that day, but when John shifted into his next song, Conway Twitty's haunting Goodbye Time, something the room shifted to. The usual bustle of cameras and whispers went still. His voice, trembling but full of ache, carried the weight of someone who had lived more pain than his young age suggested. Mid-performance, Judge Luke Bryan, who had initially passed on him, changed his vote, visibly moved, his face reflecting the kind of emotion no coaching could manufacture. It wasn't just talent that won them over, it was honesty, the kind of raw, unfiltered sincerity that hits harder than any high note. But John's most unforgettable moment would come later in the competition during the Songs of Faith episode. Standing before the nation, he sang a song he wrote himself, Tell That Angel I Love Her, a tribute to Maggie Dunn. The room fell into a stunned hush. His voice cracked, his hands shook, but he didn't stop. Through tear-filled eyes, he pushed forward, transforming grief into something holy. The judges, often so composed, were visibly shaken. Carrie Underwood called it beautiful, noting the timelessness in his tone. Luke Bryan, nearly speechless, said that moment erased any doubt he ever had about. Long before he ever sang for millions, John Foster had a different calling, one far from bright lights and standing ovations. In fact, if you'd asked him just a few years ago, he would have told you his future lay in a lab coat, not under a spotlight. Growing up in southern Louisiana, John was no stranger to illness. In his community, cancer wasn't a statistic, it was a constant. Environmental factors had created what some locals referred to as a cancer alley, where nearly every family had a story. John's was no different. He saw friends, neighbors, even extended family members wither from the disease. These experiences weren't just painful, they were formative. They lit a quiet fire inside him, one rooted not in ambition, but in empathy. It's why he pursued biology at LSU. It's why he spent high school not chasing stardom, but studying anatomy and chemistry. His dream was to become an oncologist, not just to treat, but to understand, to fight a monster that had taken so much from those he loved. In interviews, John has spoken with calm conviction about this path. He once said, "God heals spiritually, but science is how we help on earth." That balance between faith and fact became his compass. Even as music slowly crept from the background of his life to the front of the stage, he never abandoned that vision. If anything, his rising fame gave new meaning to his original goal. He began to imagine a life where he could do both, heal through medicine and heal through music. The concept of a singing doctor may sound whimsical, but for John, it's deadly serious. It's a vision forged in tragedy, resilience, and a rare kind of selflessness. As he performed on national television, he wasn't just chasing a dream. He was building a platform. A voice not just for songs, but for service. In a world obsessed with overnight fame and viral moments, John Foster reminded us that some dreams aren't about ego, they're about impact. And even if his path takes him away from the stage someday, the heart behind his journey will remain exactly the same. As John Foster's popularity soared on American Idol, so did the noise surrounding him, but not all of it was applause. With visibility came scrutiny, and soon the internet began to swirl with whispers and wild accusations. In an era where fame is often accompanied by digital conspiracy, John found himself at the center of a growing storm. Rumors began to circulate that he wasn't who he claimed to be. One of the most persistent claims was that John wasn't actually 18, but rather 24 years old, an allegation that, if true, could have disqualified him from the competition entirely. Some even speculated that he had falsified documents to appear younger. As these claims spread, anonymous forums and social media threads picked apart every detail of his life, from his facial hair to his high school graduation date. But it didn't stop there. Internet sleuths insisted that he wasn't from Addis, Louisiana, as he'd stated, but from Benton, Kentucky, a place John had never even visited. Adding fuel to the fire, another bizarre theory suggested he was secretly related to country legend Dwight Yoakam, and that he had already signed a record deal with Sugar Hill Records prior to his Idol audition. These rumors, unverified and increasingly outrageous, began to cast a shadow over his heartfelt performances. What started as fan speculation soon bled into mainstream online conversations, threatening to shift the public narrative away from his music and toward scandal. For a teenager already carrying the emotional weight of personal loss, the onslaught was more than just hurtful, it was destabilizing. The irony? These rumors weren't based on fact or investigation. They were born from suspicion, amplified by clicks, and fueled by the skepticism that often meets authenticity. In trying to understand how someone so genuine could exist in a polished, competitive world, the internet did what it often does. It questioned everything. But John Foster wasn't about to let untruths define his truth. What he did next wasn't just bold, it was a masterclass in grace under fire. Faced with a tidal wave of speculation, most young contestants might have crumbled or at least gone silent. But John Foster chose a different path. Rather than letting the gossip spiral unchecked, he took to his official Facebook page and addressed the rumors head-on. No press team, no dramatic video, just John, writing with the same sincerity that made America fall in love with him in the first place. In his post, he calmly dismantled each claim. First, the age controversy. He confirmed that yes, he was still a teenager, 18 years old at the time of his audition. No deception, no manipulation, just confusion rooted in assumptions. He included references to his high school graduation from Brusly High School in 2024, shutting down the false timeline that had been circulating. Next, he cleared the air about his roots. He was born and raised in Addis, Louisiana, not Kentucky, not Nashville, not any place imagined by rumor mills. His deep Southern roots weren't part of a PR image. They were simply his life. As for the most absurd of the claims, that he was secretly the nephew of Dwight Yoakam and already signed to Sugar Hill Records, John didn't even flinch. He stated plainly that he had no familial or professional ties to Yoakam, and he was not signed to any label. At the time of the post, he was completely independent. The impact was immediate. Fans flooded the comment section with messages of support and gratitude. They praised his maturity, his honesty, and his refusal to play into drama. In an industry where spin is often the first line of defense, John's transparency was refreshing, almost revolutionary. Supporters from Louisiana and beyond rallied behind him, not just as a contestant, but as a person worth rooting for. The truth didn't just clear his name, it reinforced his character. And in doing so, John Foster reminded America why it had been drawn to him in the first place. Because when he speaks, he means it. And when he sings, there's nothing hiding behind the music. Just heart, history, and the courage to be real. As the curtain began to fall on this season of American Idol, fans across the country held their breath, wondering if John Foster would take home the crown. But for many, the answer had already been written, not in a vote tally, but in the moments he created. Because win or lose, John's journey had already transcended the competition. He didn't just perform, he gave. He gave a voice to grief, to community, to quiet Southern resilience. In a season filled with powerhouse vocals and glittering showmanship, John stood out not by reaching for perfection, but by offering imperfection with honesty. His was a story of loss that never felt exploitative, of talent that never felt rehearsed. From his humble beginnings in a butcher shop in Addis, to the night he broke millions with Tell That Angel I Love Her, John showed the world what it means to carry purpose into art. His grace in the face of viral rumors, his clarity in honoring a fallen friend, and his unwavering kindness, both online and off, painted a picture far more lasting than any trophy. Idol had launched many stars, but few had touched the soul of its audience like John Foster. For some, he was a grieving teenager. For others, a rising country artist. But for most, he became a symbol of authenticity, of healing, and of the beautiful ache that lives inside the human spirit. His performances weren't about fame, they were about connection. They reminded us that behind every soft voice is a hard story, and sometimes the quietest contestant has the loudest impact. Whether or not his name was called in the finale, one truth had become undeniable. John Foster didn't need a title to validate his gift. He had already won the one thing more powerful than votes, America's heart.